Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is, and welcome. Left side of the aisle welcomes you, as do I, your host. Larry Erickson's my name. And for about, near the next half hour, I'm going to be talking about some things that I think you might be interested in and probably should know about. Any reactions to the show can be sent to me, as always, directly. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING, at AOL.com. If you didn't catch that, you can go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be here a couple of times during the show. And you can get the email address from there if you missed it, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather. The only thing I ask, as always, if you do send me email, to please include something in the subject line that makes it clear this is about the show, it's not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer. So, with that, let's get to it. I always like to start when I can with some good news, and today I have actually to start a couple of bits of what you'd have to call medical good news. The first is that researchers now have known for some time that neuroinflammation, that is inflammation of the brain, is associated with Alzheimer's. New research just published in the peer-reviewed journal Brain strongly suggests that such inflammation, which can arise from an overactive immune system, is not so much a result of Alzheimer's as it is a driver of Alzheimer's. The brains of people with Alzheimer's were found to have higher levels of microglia, or immune cells, than other people, and that suggested brain inflammation, and the numbers of such cells increased as the disease progressed. But in an experiment, mice with an Alzheimer's-like condition were given an inhibitor that would keep such microglia from multiplying, and the progression of the disease stopped when the numbers of microglia stabilized. Dr. Diego Gomez Nicola, he's the lead author of the study, said the results are, quoting him, as close to evidence as we can get that this particular pathway is active in the development of Alzheimer's disease, and that it's time to progress to the clinical setup. That is, it's time to start looking for medications. Now, it's obviously too early for any kind of celebration, and you need to remember, of course, that even when an appropriate medication is found, this is not a cure for Alzheimer's or a prevention for Alzheimer's, but it would stop the disease from progressing. That's all it would do. But for those people suffering with Alzheimer's, and especially for the families of people suffering with Alzheimer's, that only, that's all it would do. That's actually a very, very big thing. So this still ranks as one of the most exciting discoveries, one of the most hopeful discoveries about Alzheimer's in over a decade. And that makes it good news. Next up, about 3.5 years ago, it was actually back in May 2012, I mentioned something called the Guinea Worm. The Guinea worm is a parasite which humans contract by drinking infested waters. In a simplified version of its life cycle, that once ingested, the worm burrows through the intestinal wall and slowly moves through the subcutaneous tissues until about a year later, it emerges from the body through a swollen and very painful blister, usually by the feet or the lower part of the legs. By this time, the female worm has grown from a few millimeters to as much as a meter, that is a foot long, and has hundreds of thousands of eggs. Now, the thing is, in trying to ease the pain of the blister, a lot of afflicted people would put their feet in water, which only triggers the release of the eggs back into the water in order to infect and infest the next victim. The pain involved with the blister, which is often described as feeling like the area around it is on fire, that pain can be crippling. And the only way to remove the worm is to catch it as it starts to exit the wound and to wind it around a stick as you slowly put it out. And in this case, the word slowly it means what it says, because this process can take weeks to complete. That leaves people to live through months of debilitating pain, making it impossible for them to tend cows or take care of crops or do anything else to provide for themselves or their families. Now, the guinea worm is an ancient affliction. In fact, some suggest that the fiery serpents mentioned in Numbers 21 were the guinea worm. But on the other hand, Numbers 21 also says that much people of Israel died as the result, and actual deaths from the guinea worm are very rare, so I tend to doubt that. But on the other hand, there is a clear reference to it in the Ebers Papyrus, which is an Egyptian papyrus of herbal knowledge dating to about 1550 BCE, which interestingly is only about 100 years apart from the dating of Numbers 21. All right, the thing is, in 1986, the Carter Center, which is, yes, the one founded by Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, began a campaign to end this particular affliction through education about the worm's behavior and improving the availability of water filtration system so new people don't get infected. At that time, in 1986, when they started doing this, the number of people affected by the guinea worm was about 3.5 million. By 2012, which is when I was first talking about this, I was able to report that by the year before, 2011, the number of cases were down to around 1,100 cases. So why do we bring this all up again now? Because now I can report that the Carter Center has said that the number of cases of guinea worm in 2015 was 22. That is quite literally a 99.999% reduction from 1986. Now, there's still much to do. Anyone who was involved in any of these kind of campaigns knows full well that the last cases are the most expensive and the hardest to actually stamp out. But the fact remains that the guinea worm is on the brink of being the second disease after smallpox to be eradicated from the human population and the first parasite to be eradicated from the human population. And this is done despite the fact there is no drug for this. There is no vaccine for this. This has all been accomplished through improving the knowledge and the health environment of the people affected. And how's that for good news? Now, one other piece of good news I wanted to talk about, the Iran deal is back in the news. That's the one that involved Iran agreeing to modify its nuclear program in a way that would prevent it from getting a nuclear weapon in exchange for lifting of political and economic sanctions against the nation. Well, Secretary of State John Kerry said on January 7th that implementation of the deal may be only days away and that Iran is on track to meet its pledge of sharply reducing its ability to produce nuclear weapons, the nuclear weapons that it probably was never trying to build in the first place. And no, Kerry did not say that last part. In fact, there is a report that, in line with the agreement, Iran had already removed the core of its Arak heavy water reactor and replaced it with filled the core with cement. That was an act which Reuters, with notable British understatement, said would reduce the plant's ability to produce plutonium. Yeah, replacing the core with cement, yeah, it will do that, yes. Iranian officials denied that particular report, but said at the same time that the process of modernizing the Arak nuclear plant, which would involve removing the core, was underway. Now, it's possible that the conflict in these reports is due to jockeying among various political factions, various political rivals within the Iranian government. If it turns out the core had in fact been removed, it would not be the first time that a report that Iran was acceding to the demands of the so-called P5+1 nations was denied, only later to have that report confirmed. What can't be denied is that Iran has significantly reduced its number of centrifuges, transferred the bulk of its low-enriched uranium to Russia, and has agreed to sell some of its excess heavy water to the United States, which means things are progressing. Now, I say now, as I said in the past, that I was and I am kind of uncomfortable with this deal, but probably not for the reasons you think. My first reason is that, again, there was actually no solid proof that Iran was ever trying to build a nuclear weapon. In fact, all those dire, breathless predictions that Iran was a year away or 6 months away or 3 months away from having nuclear weapons, none of those predictions ever proved to be true. But also, another reason for being not happy with this is that, frankly, this deal smacks of just raw imperialism, of a group of big nations basically telling a smaller nation, you're going to do what we tell you to, period, like it or lump it. But I approved, I accepted the Iran deal because the alternative was the real possibility of a stampede to war with Iran. And indeed, that idea still sits in the back of the heads of a bunch of troglodytes in Congress who even now are pushing a bill that would block the lifting of sanctions on Iran, which is, remember, is supposed to be our part of this deal, until the administration can, quote, certify the entity is not a terror financier, human rights abuser, or involved in the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. In other words, these people want to wreck this agreement by moving the goalposts not just back, but completely out of the stadium. Now, even if that bill passes Congress, which it likely won't, it would be vetoed, and there's no chance such a veto would be overridden. But it does serve as a reminder that there are still those in Congress, and not all of them are goppers, who have blood in their eyes and war fever in their groins, and who would, if given the opportunity, have U.S. soldiers on the ground, and I actually should say more U.S. soldiers on the ground, not only in Syria and Iraq, but Iran as well. For some people, war is the only option they can think of, which is why I accept the Iran deal and regard its progress as good news. All right, next up, one of our regular weekly features, it's the Clown Award, given as always for some act of meritorious stupidity. And this week, we get to see the difference between a clown wannabe and a real clown in close competition. Our wannabe clown, who winds up being the one getting the pie in the face, is New Hampshire State Representative Al Baldessario. But our winner of the big red nose this week is his colleague and fellow twit, New Hampshire State Representative Josh Moore. Now, you may be surprised to learn that in 33 states, there's actually no law against a woman going topless in public. 14 states have some kind of nuanced laws, but only 3 actually ban it outright. New Hampshire, it develops, is one of the 33, not one of the 3, and doggone it, Josh Moore wants to do something about it. He has introduced a bill that would make a woman showing her nipples in public a full-fledged misdemeanor of lewdness and public indecency. Not men, remember, just women. Repeat offenders of this law would have to register as sex offenders. Now, yes, there is an exception for breastfeeding. Be thankful for small favors. But still, this is the crisis that Moore is convinced needs addressing. Well, State Representative Amanda Bolden has been a vocal opponent of the bill, arguing that it's just another attempt by men to control women's bodies and that the state should not be in the business of passing laws that apply only to women. Well, in response, our wannabe, Representative Baldessaro, said of Representative Bolden that, quote, your nipple would be the last one I'd want to see. Yeah, real classy. He said that before saying that Representative Bolden wants to turn our family beaches into a pervert show. Now, admittedly, this is not up to his usual standards. Representative Baldy once called the head of the New Hampshire Democratic Party, who is a gay man, called him a pervert. Apparently he has a real hang-up about that word. And he said he was disgusted when a gay Marine came out during one of his town meetings. But despite that, not up to his standards, but still a nice try. But Baldy, you got outclassed. Josh Moore's response on Facebook to Representative Bolden was this, and I'm quoting, don't give me the liberal talking points, Amanda. If it's a woman's natural inclination to pull her nipple out in public and you support that, then you should have no problem with a man's inclination to stare at it and grab it. All right. A woman appears in public topless. All right. Look at it. Yeah, well, you kind of got to expect that, okay? Stare at it. Nah, that's really pretty creepy. No. Grab it? No. What kind of numbskull pervert do you have to be to even propose such a thing? What is wrong with you? Actually, we do know what's wrong with you, Josh Moore. You are a complete and total clown. All right, before we go to the break, there's one more thing I want to talk about. And this is something, a lot of times on the show I try to talk about things that I figure you're less likely to have heard about, not being talked about a lot. But this is something you've undoubtedly heard about, but I still wanted to mention it. It's an RIP, and you already know probably who I'm going to talk about. The genre-defining, gender-bending creative artist, which I actually think is a much better description than musician. David Bowie died on January 10th after an 18-month battle with cancer. He was 69. Now, so much has been written about this, about him, and about his career, that I'm not going to try to cover the same territory. So I'm just going to tell you about two things about David Bowie that I happen to remember. One, and surprisingly, this wasn't often mentioned in the articles and the obituaries about him, but one was his turn playing the lead in the play The Elephant Man on Broadway in the fall of 1980. Now, when it was announced that he was going to be playing the role, critics denounced this as some kind of just publicity gimmick. But after they saw him on stage as he portrayed the so-called Elephant Man without prostheses, but only using contortions of body position and movement to suggest the deformities involved, the critics were, son of a gun, the guy can act. To which I could only think, anybody that's been through as many personalities in as short a time as he has, yeah, of course he can act. The other thing was a Bing Crosby Christmas special in 1977 on which Bowie was a guest, and the Peace on Earth Little Drummer Boy duet that they did still pops up around Christmas time. But what I remember was learning that Bing Crosby, who was 73 at the time, had absolutely no idea who David Bowie was. But after working with him, said, the kid's pretty good, which he was. R.I.P. David Bowie, and let's take a break. Hi there, we're back, as you can probably tell. All right, next up, there's actually some news about fracking. That's important. Fracking, in polite terms, it's controversial. In less polite terms, it's another industry scam to try to maximize profit while not caring about the public health. Now, in case you're not familiar with it, or it slipped your mind, fracking is a means of increasing production from oil and natural gas wells by pumping in a mixture of water, sludge, and some cocktail of toxic chemicals. And we don't know actually what's in them because that's a trade secret that the companies can keep private. But they pump that mixture into the well under such pressure that it literally fractures the rocks surrounding the drill head, allowing more fossil fuel to leak out of the fissures that are created. This practice has been connected to contaminated water supplies and earthquakes, particularly over the past several years. So Congress charged the EPA with studying the impacts of fracking on drinking water. This past June, the agency released its report, which included an executive summary that declared that fracking has not led to, quote, widespread systemic impacts on drinking water resources in the U.S. A conclusion I mentioned at the time was actually chock full of weasel words. Now it develops the EPA's own Science Advisory Board, which reviews the agency's major studies, agrees with me. The 31-member panel determined that, quote, major findings are ambiguous or are inconsistent with the observations and data presented in the body of the report. The real point here lies in the misuse of the terms systemic and widespread. Now, yes, most U.S. water supplies in the United States have not been affected by fracking. Because fracking is not done in most places in the United States. It's only done where there is active drilling for natural gas and oil. And in those places, yes, there clearly, in a number of them, has been a demonstrable, measurable impact on local drinking water supplies. The result, in part, of an average of 15 fracking-related chemical spills in the United States each day. But what did the media glom onto here? The fracking-friendly, no widespread systemic impacts. It's just another example of how we are malinformed, uninformed, and misinformed by corporate media. Now, as a footnote to all this, 2015 was also the year that the U.S. Geological Survey found that fracking in 8 states in eastern and central United States had led to sharply increased earthquake activity, and the state of Oklahoma, after dragging its feet for years, finally admitted that the majority of the recent astonishing increase in the number of earthquakes in the state, that the majority of that was due to fracking. Fracking should be stopped. All right, now for our other regular weekly feature, this is the outrage of the week. In July 2014, Eric Garner was killed by New York City police who swarmed him, escalating a minor confrontation over a claim he was illegally selling loose cigarettes into a multi-person assault, with cop Daniel Pantaleo, I'm going to get his name right, Daniel Pantaleo, grabbing Garner in a chokehold, which is actually banned by departmental policy, and the cops ignored Garner's pleas that he couldn't breathe as, in effect, Pantaleo choked him to death. This is all happening in front of numerous witnesses, and it was recorded on video. Unlike the case of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, there was no ambiguity here, no conflicting testimony, and it made no difference. When no charges were issued against Pantaleo, even people like Bill O'Reilly and Charles Krauthammer were shocked by this. The city, in fact, wound up settling a wrongful death suit filed by the family for $5.9 million. But now, 18 months later, the NYPD has found someone to blame. Her name is Kizzy Adonis, and she is, or perhaps was, a sergeant in the NYPD and was one of the 2 supervising officers at the scene of Garner's killing. Now she has been stripped of her gun and badge and faces 4 charges, departmental charges of failure to supervise, charges which could lead her to being fired from the police force. Sergeant Adonis wasn't even assigned to patrol at the time of the incident. She heard the call on her radio and on her own initiative responded to the scene. One witness says he heard her say to the other cops, "Let up, you got him already." She then went to a nearby ambulance to make a call for additional assistance. So apparently she is facing charges for not trying hard enough to stop the other cops who were ignoring her, or for calling for medical assistance, or for both. It's really not clear exactly what she's being charged with. What is clear is that the other supervising sergeant on the scene, the one who was actually assigned to the unit there, has not been charged, nor have any of the other cops been involved, have been charged. The deadline for filing such departmental charges expires on January 17th. So lacking some last-minute developments, she will be, or perhaps by the time you're watching this, is the only one charged. By the way, did I mention that Kizzy Adonis is black? 18 months after Eric Garner was killed by cops using a chokehold banned specifically because of the risk of killing somebody, in a case that stunned even the right wing, the only person the NYPD has found at fault is a black woman who didn't even have to be there. The question of police brutality and racism and the departmental corruption that promotes and protects it is no longer one of recognizing the brutality and the racism and the corruption, because they become undeniable to anybody not completely blinded by their ideology. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Because the nothing we have done is an outrage. All right, we're going to finish up today by doing something very light, just very easy, very fun. Early on when I did the show, I actually did a thing. See, I like to collect lyrics from songs, lyrics that are either particularly very good or very bad. And it's an individual lyric within a song. It has nothing to do with whether the song itself is good or bad. It's the individual line. And I ask people to submit their own options for such lines, and I didn't get much response, but now, of course, with my fame worldwide that's developed in the intervening years, maybe I'll get more response this time. So I'm going to give you some examples of what I mean. I've got 3 lines that I think are actually bad lines, and again, it's unrelated to whether the song as a whole is good or not, and 4 lines that I think are good lines, and then I'm going to invite you to submit your own. Okay, the bad lines. There's a great old song. It's a classic song. The best known version was done by the Platters. It's called Smoke It's in Your Eyes. The 3rd verse has a line, laughing friends deride, tears I cannot hide. And every time I heard that line, I kept thinking, get new friends. Another one, song Angel by Shaggy. I actually like this song, even though the melody for the refrain was ripped off from the chorus of Angel of the Morning. But in the refrain of the song, it's got this line, closer than my peeps you are to me, as syntax cries and begs for mercy. A 3rd example, Train's song, Hey Soul Sister. I think the first line of the song, I think this is, your lipstick stains on the front lobe of my left side brain, to which I can only say, yuck. All right, good lines, good lines. Appropriately enough, David Bowie in his song Changes. I love this line. And these children that you spit upon as they try to change their world are immune to your consultations. They are quite aware of what they're going through. Jim Croce's old song, Operator, has one line, she's living in LA with my best old ex-friend Ray, which I always love because it's like the entire story of the relationship and what happened is in that one line. Lady Antebellum's song, Need You Now, has the line, I'd rather hurt than feel nothing at all, which I always thought was exquisitely sad. But this is possibly my all-time favorite single lyric line. It's from Like a Prayer by Madonna, and the line is, you call my name and it feels like home, which I think is a wonderfully poetic line. So if you have your own ideas, again, it's not whether the whole song is good or bad, but the individual lyric, send it to me, whoviating@AOL.com. I know one of you, and you know who you are, did it last time, but you gave me the thing that was about 5 or 6 lines long, and that was sort of not the point. All right, we're going to wrap up there. I have to tell you, there are some changes coming to the show. I've been doing this almost every week for nearly 5 years now, and that becomes a bit of a burden, as anybody who's done something like this can tell you. So what we're doing is we're cutting back the schedule a little bit. The last week of each month, there will not be a new show. So basically it means, I normally would take about 2 weeks off a year. So that's about 50 shows I would do in a year. We're cutting back from 50 to 36, okay? Also, the name of the show is going to be changed. If you have ideas of what it should be, by all means, let me know, although I've already decided what the new name is going to be. And that'll get revealed at the same time we get some new graphics, because the graphics are also 5 years old, and I want to change those too. In any event, that's it. That's it for this week. You have the best week you possibly can. We will see you in a week. For now, as always, peace.